Welcome back, everybody, to the weekly OLA Adult Dad Faith Formation Gospel Podcast, where we take around 15 minutes, unpack Sunday's gospel reading, so when we hear it proclaimed at Mass, we'll have a better understanding of and appreciation for what the Word of God has for us. And this Sunday, the church celebrates the Feast of the Epiphany. In fact, the second Sunday after Christmas, every year, we celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany. And in fact, every year, it's the same readings. So even though we are technically in the year of Luke, the gospel reading for this Sunday comes from Matthew, because every year it's the same reading. And it's Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, where it talks about, in large part, the Magi and them journeying from the east to Bethlehem to pay homage to the newborn King of the Jews. And we said that, primarily this passage involves the Magi. And number one, because it's 12 verses, and number two, because it involves a lot of subtleties and nuance, to fully unpack the entire passage is kind of beyond the scope of the time we have here. Because believe it or not, even though these things do stretch maybe 20 minutes or so, I do really try and keep them within 15. So a full unpacking of the entire passage, a little bit beyond the scope of our time limit. So what I'm going to do in this podcast is just focus our time and energy on the Magi and ask and answer 4 questions regarding them. Number one, who are they? Number two, why are they even there? Number 3, how would they have known that this star would lead them to the newborn king? And what's up with those 3 gifts that they bring? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So within the time constraints we have in this gospel podcast, we're just going to focus on the Magi aspect of it, and then we're going to specifically focus on those 4 questions. Who are they? Why are they there? How would they have known? And what's up with those gifts? I'll say that if you want a fuller treating of this particular passage, and a fuller treating of the Magi in general, the website that I film content for, freshcatholic.com, I do a 1-hour talk on just the Magi. So if you're looking for even more details than we have the time here to provide, you can always look up my 1-hour talk on the Magi on the website freshcatholic.com. But for our purposes here, let's take a look at those 4 questions regarding the Magi. Now let's go ahead and get the passage up off the ground let me read the first couple of verses. Again, Matthew 2, verses 1 to 12. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." Now, again, I read those verses, and as we've said in podcasts in the past, as Catholics, we hear these passages year after year, so we develop a certain level of familiarity with them. And sometimes the familiarity we have with them on one level kind of blinds us to the details and the nuances and the subtleties, underneath the surface. And there was one word, because we say words have meaning, right, in this podcast. There's one word in the verses that I quoted you that I want to mention before we get to our treatment of the Magi in those 4 questions. Now, let me read the verses again. See if you can spot the word I'm thinking of. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." Now, did you catch the word? That word, simple 2-letter word, is, okay? His, 3-letter word, if I can do the math. Look at how Matthew records it. We saw his star at its rising. Not we saw a star, we saw his star. So that begs the question, which is one of the questions we'll answer. How did they know that this star they saw was his star and not some random star. Have you ever caught that word before? We saw his star at its rising. Words have meaning. That's why you have to read, listen, and watch closely, as we say. So let's focus on the Magi. First of all, who are they? Well, they've been characterized as wise men, and indeed they were wise, because these Magi, they were schooled and educated in philosophy, the sciences, astrology, astronomy. So they were very learned, they were very educated, they were wise men. And because one of the disciplines that they were educated and knowledgeable in were astronomy and astrology, it's no surprise that they spent a lot of time gazing and studying the stars, their various constellations, and their movements. And there's no surprise that that's how they recognized this particular star, because one of the disciplines they were involved in and wise in and knowledgeable in addition to philosophy and the sciences, was astrology and astronomy. So they were very much wise men. And because of that, they were advisors to kings, because kings sought them out because of their knowledge, because of their wisdom in all of these different divisions, okay? Because they spent a lot of time reading and interpreting the stars, the constellations, and their movements. So that's who they were, and that's why they've always been characterized rightly as wise men. Now, why are they in Bethlehem? Well, because they saw not just the star, but his star, okay? Which also brings up another question. How did they know this star was his star? And how did they know that this baby that they were coming to pay homage to was the newborn King of the Jews? Because again, as Catholics, we're very familiar. Yes, they saw a star. Yes, they came to visit the newborn King of the Jews. But wait a second. How did they know it was his star, and how did they know he was the newborn King of the Jews? Well, to unpack and to answer that question, once again, we have to go back to our old buddy, we know him well, the Old Testament, right? And specifically, we're going to go back to the book of Numbers, chapter 24, verses 15 to 17. Let me give the background. You've got a king, right? And he's asking this prophet Balaam, right, to curse the Israelites. And every time he attempts to curse the Israelites, he winds up blessing them. Now, part of this whole thing is after that, he evokes a prophecy. It's called the prophecy of Balaam. And we find that in Numbers 24, verses 15 to 17. Let me read you the prophecy, and that tells us why they knew it was his star, and they knew he was the newborn King of the Jews. Here's the prophecy of Balaam. I see him, but not now. Again, this is a prophecy. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not nigh. A star, now the him he's talking about is, of course, Jesus. So I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not nigh. A star, okay, shall come forth from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. So Balaam talks about a star and a scepter in the context of seeing him, but not now, in the future. The him we're talking about is Jesus. And his prophecy about Jesus involves a star and a scepter. So the Magi, when they saw, knowing the prophecy, when they saw the star, they concluded, oh, that must be the star that Balaam is talking about. That must be his star. And if Balaam mentions a scepter, who carries a scepter? A king. So that must be his star and not some random star, and he must be a king. All coming from the prophecy of Balaam. So that's who the Magi were. That's why they saw a star, because they studied astronomy and astrology. That's why they knew the kind of star it was, his star, and that's why they knew who he was, a newborn king. Okay? Now, let's continue and ask the next question. What about those gifts? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now again, words have meaning, right? If you look at the passage, if you look at the event, when the Magi arrive in this stable at Bethlehem, and they encounter the Holy Family, Joseph, Mary, and the newborn Jesus, yes, they bring gifts, but a close reading indicates that they didn't give the gifts to Joseph and Mary. They gave the gifts to the baby Jesus. The gifts were not specifically for Joseph and Mary, they were specifically for Jesus. So not only does that, it gives us two layers of curiosity. Number one, well, three layers. Number one, why are they bringing gifts? Period. Number two, why those three gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh? And why are they giving those three gifts, not to the parents, Joseph and Mary, but to Jesus? So really our question about what's up with the gifts involves kind of three layers or three aspects. So let's take them one at a time. Why are they bringing gifts, period? Well, again, proper protocol. Whenever you came into the presence of a king, whenever you had an audience with a king, you would, bring gifts. It was just a protocol. So this is the newborn king of the Jews. The Magi are coming into his presence. So they are fulfilling, they're going with protocol and they're bringing him gifts. So that's why they brought gifts, period. Now, why those three specific gifts? Because they could have brought any gifts, right? Why gold, why frankincense, and myrrh? Well, let's dig behind the significance and the meaning of each one. Now, gold was considered to be the king, oh, there's a hint, the king of all the precious metals. It was the most precious of the precious metals. So if you're going to give a king a precious metal, you want to give him the king of precious metals, which is gold. So when they bring the king of precious metals, gold, to Jesus, that indicates that he is, in fact, a king, which they knew, right? He is the king of the universe, right? The king of kings. So the gift of the gold brings out Jesus' kingship. How about the frankincense? Now, frankincense, we kind of truncate that now down to incense. But frankincense, again, if you've been at a mass where the priest has used incense, and the smoke from the incense goes up, heavenward, that's why incense is used back in the Old Testament in temple days and why it's used now in churches. Because the smoke from the incense signifies and symbolizes our prayers going heavenward to God. Okay? And incense is used, Old Testament temple services, nowadays in Mass, right? So the usage of incense, it's used in worship, which brings out Jesus not only as king, which is the gold does, but it also brings out him being the high priest, because incense is used in worship, and priests conduct that worship back in the Old Testament and now back modern times. So that's the deal with the frankincense. The myrrh. Now, the Jewish people, they didn't embalm their dead. What they would do is they would wrap their dead in burial cloths, okay, very tightly, and they would bury him in a tomb. So as they were wrapping the body with burial cloths, in between each layer of wrapping, they would put spices to kind of keep down the stench from the decomposing body for as long as possible. Well, myrrh was one of the spices that you would use to, according to the phrase, spice a dead body before you put it into the tomb. So myrrh was a burial spice. So gold indicates this newborn baby is king. The frankincense indicates he's high priest. And the myrrh points forward, prefigures and foreshadows that this newborn king, this high priest, is going to die and be buried. So the gifts have huge theological significance to them because they bring out those aspects of who Jesus is and eventually what he's going to do. So again, we can't treat the entire passage exhaustively because we just don't have the time. What we've done is we've kind of focused on the Magi. And just to kind of review, what have we learned about the Magi? We've learned who they are, wise men, and why they've been characterized wise men. We know how they even saw a star because they were involved in astrology and astronomy, and they spent time looking at and studying the stars. We found out why they knew it was his star and why they knew he was a king, because they knew the prophecy of Balaam. And we know why they brought gifts, period, and why they brought those three gifts in general. And we also indicated that they brought them to the king, not to his parents, because that's what you did. When you came into the presence of a king, you gave the gifts to the king. All right? Jesus is king. The Magi gave the gifts to Jesus and not to Joseph and Mary. Now, interestingly enough, just to kind of tack this on, again, this is kind of what some of the thinking has been, and it's just kind of theorizing and thinking, that even though these gifts were given to Jesus and not to Joseph and Mary, nevertheless, providentially, Joseph and Mary were able to make use of them. Because we know if we kind of fast forward through the story, Joseph and Mary, because King Herod is going to look to kill the newborn king of the Jews, he's going to look to kill Jesus. Joseph and Mary and the baby Jesus leave, right, and they go to Egypt to escape Herod. Well, the journey to Egypt, and however long they stayed in Egypt, that's going to take financing. That's going to take money, right? So the thinking, the theorizing has always been for Joseph and Mary to have the finances and the money to make that journey and live in Egypt and eat and whatever for however long they did. They made use of those gifts, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they kind of sold them or bartered with them to get the financing needed to make that journey and to stay in Egypt for however long they did. Now, this is just thinking, this is just theorizing. We don't know for sure, but even though the gifts were given to Jesus, many theologians and scholars have theorized that nevertheless Joseph and Mary were able to make use of them, which is another reason why the Magi brought those gifts, is because God knew that Joseph and Mary would need them and that they would have some value. So just a little extra tidbit for you. I'm looking at the monitor, which Max has prominently displayed to keep me honest. It says about 19 minutes. So again, not an exhaustive treatment. If you want that, go to freshcatholic.com. Look up my one-off talk on the Magi, but at least this gives us a little more information about the Magi, maybe after hearing this podcast, than we had when we first sat down. So with that, have a blessed Feast of the Epiphany. By the way, Epiphany means an unveiling or a revealing. So with that, until next Sunday, as always, from the campus of St. Bonaventure High School, with Max behind the camera, take care and God bless.